Welcome, Liz, and thank you so much for facilitating today this session of Quakerism 101 on worship and ministry. Really appreciate that.
Right. And we are recording, so if you don't want to be seen, then please, but I think most of us want to see you. That would be nice. It helps when you're doing this. So, and our topic is worship and ministry. And as I said at the end of the meeting, that is both the worship part, but also when it is that you should minister, you should, or you can, or you feel comfortable ministering, because a lot of us have a hard time figuring that out for a long time being in the Society of Friends. So I found this video, which was done. It's a series that's really a Quakerism 101 series. There are 7 of them on different things, and I think we'll use the one on peace and social concerns too. But it's done by Nadine Hoover. Nadine Hoover is a friend from New York yearly meeting. She grew up as a Quaker in a small town in upstate New York, Alfred. But it was also a town where there's a really wonderful college, arts college actually, and her father taught there. And she went on to she developed into a corporate person for a while there, and then realized that she wasn't really feeling the right about that work. And that was basically, she married an Indonesian and had two daughters, and was in Indonesia and established the Friends Peace Teams in Indonesia. And so she's been a very significant part of the Friends Peace Teams work in Asia for a long time. At the same time, she also has had a ministry of interpreting the Society of Friends, and I think in this case, she really summarizes well what Quaker worship and ministry is all about. So I'm going to share my screen, share sound, right, Carrie?
Yes.
Yeah, and then
I'm not sure which one.
That one.
I think
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah. So, and we'll just talk about this afterwards. Actually, let's have a few moments of silence before we actually listen to Nadine, and I'll put her on and let her join us.
That's okay. You just click share.
Hi, So this segment is on the essential Quaker practice of meeting for worship. Meeting for worship is the first structure of the Religious Society of Friends. It's so simple and yet amazingly complex.
Can everybody hear that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we begin by stopping. We stop in our body, we stop in our mind. The brain is a muscle, let it sort of soften within your skull. And whatever that habitual guard that we have up, let it go. Let go of our distresses, let go of our tension, and let our guard down as the way we open up to the Spirit. This is a very, very physical reorientation of every cell in the body. And so when we as Quakers commit to being inwardly guided, one of the primary tests of whether we're acting out of that spirit, that grounded, centered spirit within ourselves, or acting out of our own distresses and pathologies, is that distress can't stop. It says, no, it has to, I have to do this, I have to go. But the Spirit, truth is just there. It can always stop and it can always open up. And so as we stop and then let go and let down our guard as the way we open up, in that open space, we listen inwardly to that still small voice, that, that tender place that has been opened up, and allow the Spirit to come in and heal that place, but also to illuminate where that pain, that distress comes from not being aligned, our lives not being aligned with the truth that we know within us, and that we can open and expect guidance and revelation for both ourselves, but each of us, but also for us as a people. So if we receive a message that's for myself, then we don't stand and speak it. We keep it within inside and we let it work within us. Because if we stand and speak it, then we think we're done. That's it. But it's not it. We really have to take it in and let the implications of it work within us and change us. And once we have gotten to that point, then we can share it with our companions, or maybe even with our whole meeting. But the original message for ourselves, we should take within ourselves and let it work within us. But if we receive a message in worship that feels like it's for others, or for the meeting as a whole, for us as a people, then it's our responsibility to stand and speak it. We are the channel through which revelation comes, and it is our responsibility to deliver that to the community. Whether the message comes to you during the week and the message is prepared, or whether it's spontaneous, whether it's before or during or after formal worship, part of worship is to deliver the message and the guidance to the community that arises within us in our worship. So meeting for worship is a place to practice both plain listening, the simple, direct, plain listening, and the simple, direct, plain speaking. It's not our job to go out and get messages. It's our job to let our guard down and be open and to receive the messages when they come to us. But as Quakers, our primary job as human beings is to let go of the human distress, let go of our egos and open up and live in the Spirit, to celebrate, to sing out, to find the pure joy of life, and to live in that place, that place that is a place of joy and gratitude and celebration of life. And in that place we can be fully aware of the sources of our emotions or our distresses or our fears. We can be fully aware of the rage and the outrage, but we don't fuel them and we don't let them fuel us. We draw our strength from the power of the Spirit, the wholeness, the wellness, the joy, the beauty, the delight in the gift of life itself, which does not avoid or shirk or withdraw from the condition of humanity, but pours in to heal and to uplift and to guide, and to have courage to take those steps that we need to take. And then we extend that sense of worship into every moment of our lives. It's a kind of praying without ceasing. It's a celebrating and an appreciation of life in every moment. It's the living of our life, the treating of our daily life as a sacrament, that we focus on the true and the loving in every moment. So we can stop and worship at the start and the end of each of our days. We can look for opportunities. Early friends talked a lot about opportunities, and those were moments, finding moments where our paths cross, or times of the day or the weeks where we can come together with each other for a time to just do that practice of stopping, letting go, opening to the Spirit, feeling the healing, and expecting to receive guidance. And then after worship, we should put in our journals the messages that have been spoken so that we can take them into the experiment with our lives and bring them fully into the work of our companions and the work of our monthly meeting and the work of our religious society.
I invite you to share your own experience of worship, having heard that of Nadine's, and just let's remain give space between our messages, a little bit of space between our messages. I think that'll help for us to take it in. We can watch that video again. There's time to do that if people want to, but just unmute and share.
Well, I follow a practice very similar to Nadine's, and it takes me about 20 minutes and sometimes half an hour to stop the ego. And then, see, it's kind of paradoxical. There has to be something recording in order to get the message. And when the ego stopped, it's very often the recorder is stopped. So there's a very precise balance between having no ego and being able to receive a message. And I think that's why I've only spoken about 3 times in the last 10 years. Now, if everyone did that, let's say there are about 40 of us in the meeting, so that would be 120 times in 10 years, or about once per month, we would get a message. Is that enough? Maybe not.
I think part of what I heard Nadine say made a lot of sense to me, and maybe in my own words, it's more that, you know, when I find myself out in the world, worship doesn't stop. It's almost like the feeling of getting into worship on Sunday morning in the meeting house is almost like getting up in the morning. It's because sometimes it feels like there's the physical world around as well as the spiritual world, where I'm connected both ways. And certainly the meeting house this morning, being connected, you know, with a physical closeness, presence amongst each other, enhanced my worship this morning quite a bit.
I'm curious as to whether friends have ways in which they settle into worship.
For me, it's it's a time, and whether it's doing it in worshiping and meeting corporately with others, or setting aside a time for myself to meditate and pray quietly alone at home, it's a time of turning inward. And not necessarily, I've had to make peace with the idea of like totally shutting my mind off and like the ego, because then it gets into this whole like, well, I shouldn't be thinking, and I shouldn't be, shouldn't, da 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 da. It's just, I guess, going with the flow of letting the mind do what it's gonna do and the thoughts be there, but turning inward and allowing that to just go with that flow. Yeah.
I had a couple of things that I'm not addressing Liz's query now, sorry, because I came from before, from what Nadine said. A couple of things that stood out for me, because you hear different things about these two things that she said, so they stood out for me, you know, from other friends and things. One is that idea, sometimes you hear it stated very categorically, you know, by friends, that you do not prepare a message. You know, I remember an incident where there was a guy whose his ministry was talking to us about not killing or eating animals. I mean, he was, you know, he was a part of our meeting, but if he stood up, you knew that's probably what his message was going to be. And he had come, and he always wore T-shirts, you know, with sayings about that, like "friends don't eat friends," that kind of thing. And and there was a friend who attended occasionally, but you know, not a lot. And that friend hadn't been there for several months, and I guess he didn't quite connect who this person was. And he got up and gave one of those messages, and that friend was furious. The second friend was furious because he said he had a T-shirt on that had a vegan message, and he, you know, had a vegan message, and then he got up and gave a vegan message. Clearly, that was a prepared message, and we don't prepare messages. I mean, I remember worship and ministry having to talk to that second friend about that. So, on the other hand, I remember, and Terry or Liz can probably remind me who exactly this was. I think it was Rufus Jones, who was famous for having these messages come to him at any time and typing them out on a piece of paper, and then putting this manuscript in his vest pocket, and then waiting until Spirit told him to give it, you know, whether it was in a couple of months or whatever. So I guess that's one thing. And then the other thing I thought was real interesting was that she said, write in your journal what the message was, because I think, you know, the idea that we might record ministry in some way is I think that's great, but I think there's a hesitancy to do that because this is what Spirit gives us in this moment, and I remember being in a group like this, and someone saying to the friends who'd been around for a while, wow, and they were talking about how wonderful ministry can sometimes be and how it can really uplift the whole group and oneself. And so then someone said, well, so what are the examples of some ministry you've heard that have really done that for you? And nobody could give a concrete example because it's, there's that idea that it's not necessarily just the words, but I do like the idea that you might write that down afterwards, so those are the two things that stood out for me.
Well, there's all kinds of things that we say about ministry, like don't make it prepared. And I remember at one time somebody concocted a sort of a flow chart for how to know when you're ready to minister. It looked like a snakes and ladders game, and I just couldn't take it. If you say you don't prepare your ministry, does that mean you're never going to speak without having thought about it in advance ever? Does that mean any thought or phrase that occurs to you outside of meeting for worship is off limits when you get to meeting for worship? You can get into these sort of bizarre predicaments with this. And for me, the most important thing is just trust, trust that the light will lead you in the right way. And part of that trust is, just wait until you're ready. If you're not ready for weeks, then that's fine. But, just open yourself to the Spirit and let the Spirit guide you, and not tie yourself in knots about what your ministry ought to be.
Today was my first day actually going to the meeting house, and I came with a word in my head to cite divisiveness, and hoping to hear maybe somebody else speak to how to fix that. There's a lot of that going on, like where I live. I didn't know we weren't supposed to think something before we came.
Tisk, tisk, tisk. Spirit comes when it comes, and it could be on the drive there, it could be in the shower, it could be while you're sitting there. It comes when it comes. What I think is also powerful for me is that, in those times I'm not really sure if the message is for me or for someone else, or if even, I might wait a little bit even when I feel like it is a message. And I have had experiences where I didn't have to say it at all because someone else was in that spirit and in that place. And it relieved me of that responsibility of saying it. And it allowed me to work on it within myself, like Nadine said, that maybe it was something I needed to continue to work on rather than speak to. And then I think that helps with knowing that I don't have to, if I do give a message, I don't have to do follow-up, later in the message either. I trust that even if I didn't say everything that I needed to say, I can trust that people in their own space and time are figuring out what I didn't say, that it was inadequate. And everything we say is inadequate. There's not anything that covers everything that we need to say. So I can just kind of rest assured and know Spirit's there. Spirit's going to figure this out, and we're going to hear the words that we need to hear. And maybe people only hear every fifth word of mine because that's the word that they need to hear. They didn't need to hear all the other extraneous words. And again, that's also the way that learning how to be brief. That's not always easy. Like right now, I'm rambling. So, you know, that's an exact, I'm giving you an example of how one rambles. And so, but it is really important to know that I am just a vessel, and I might pour forth, I might not, I might only spill a dribble when maybe I need to give a cup full, but it's okay. And all those shoulds that we put on it, let them go. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah, one of the things she said that stuck in my head was praying without ceasing. And I don't know where to go with that, but that's something that stuck in my head, was that maybe in some way we're always praying.
When I walk in, can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, assuming that we're meeting physically, I figure out where to sit. And usually I sit where I can see everybody, and the sun on the windows, the glare doesn't hurt my eyes. But there's been a few times that it occurred to me just to walk in and sit next to somebody I did not know. I'll get back to that. So when I sit down, I've heard this said by another person, but I've taken it as my own. I give my body to the chair or bench. And I look at each person in the room before I soften my gaze. And so that's just the beginning. But the idea, I realized that when I choose the way I sit with those specifications, I'm not sitting by anybody. And so I don't meet a new person. And I mean, that's sort of two topics in one, but I think that's, I did attend a gathering on spoken ministry, or it was either spoken ministry or it was in unusual problems with worship. And somebody in the group asked, his name was George, Liz might come up with the name, married to a really famous Quaker woman. Anyway, he was leading that group. And you know, on the spoken ministry part, someone had a problem with how it was happening in their meeting. And George said, well, you know, it's really hard to tell when things are really authentic, or, you know, we don't know. But he was part of a group that met with a man that the meeting had thought his spoken ministry was problematic. And the man spoke regularly, like every Sunday. And a person in the group said, John, do you really believe that God speaks to you at 10 minutes before 12 every Sunday? And John said, yes.
That's a great story.
Yeah. Often I find that the messages that I hear are the ones I need to hear. And the messages, and somebody like that who isn't maybe speaking to me, I have to be sure, though, that they aren't. I mean, some week they might speak to me, you know. And so, I mean, that whole thing of trusting that, you know, but I know if I do minister, I don't know how many, I don't count when I do it. Uh, Sometimes I do find a message. This morning I found a message that I needed to share. I almost always can't remember. I mean, I think Nadine's great. You should write it down, but if you can remember what it is you said. And I always think that the words are imperfect. They are imperfect, no matter how hard I work to make them terse and it in the but what's coming through me. I ministered just before we closed the meeting. Well, where we asked for holding people in the light today. I wasn't aware of what time it was, but I struggled with whether that was a message just for me or whether it was a message for everyone else, and somehow I felt like I needed to give whatever it was I said. I just, but it's for years I never ministered in meeting. So it's and one of the things that I think she said, and I think is really important to remember is that maybe I heard it somewhere else, but sometimes we go through periods when we really are, when in the gathered silence, we really do hear messages, and then suddenly we don't, for a long, long time. And that's not a problem. And one of the things that Quakers have historically worked against is appointing, is having pastors who are expected to minister every week, because that gift is something that you can have for a while and then you don't have it again. And if you're ordained, or what Quakers are really against is ordaining, basically saying that one person has more ability to minister than any one of us. And I truly believe that children sometimes minister better than anyone else, to me at least. But it's a gift that sometimes comes for a while and then can go away again. But it's also a gift that doesn't come without a certain amount of practice, I think. Others. Yeah. Go ahead, Howard.
Just a brief comment, having been on worship and ministry a number of times over the last 20 years, the idea is that worship starts with the first person entering into some sort of communion with the Spirit. So it's started by the Spirit, and worship, and traditionally Quakers didn't have a fixed time. Worship just ended when everyone sensed that it was over, or when people started leaving. And so, I guess I've come to the realization, yes, but in our meeting, the Spirit always senses at noon that it's time for worship. The worship period is over, and I struggle with that a little bit sometimes. that we have the clock ticking for us.
I'm curious, this is going back a little ways, but Glenna, I love that story, and it had sort of a great punchline at the end there where he says, what happened after that though? When he said that, did they just say, okay, or yeah?
The situation, I think, they were especially irked about was he would speak at 10 till 12, but he would go to 12:30 or 12:15. So he was, you know, putting it over the expected time. But it was, so it was, I didn't hear, you know, he didn't tell us what happened later.
That's funny.
I often find these problems resolve themselves in time. You can speak to them. You don't have to lay down the law. You just, you know, because there isn't one. Anyway, but I did want to say something to Daniel's statement about prayer without ceasing, and to recommend Thomas Kelly's Testament of Devotion, which is one of the Quaker classics that everybody ought to read. And it's one of the few that's well known outside of Quakerism. And he said something about this that totally impressed me. He said, prayer without ceasing means that your mind operates sort of on 2 or 3 different levels. That one part of your consciousness is doing the mundane things, you know, blowing your nose, or, you know, walking down the street, or thinking about having to pay the water bill. And another part of your mind is in a state of devotion or contemplation. It's just in that different place. And that one should cultivate the ability to be in the 2 places at once, not to sort of go to one mode or the other all the time. Of course, if we were all like we were in meeting for worship all the time, we'd be bumping into things, and that would be unfortunate.
You can find a PDF of Testament of Devotion, several of them online. So, you know, it's generally, and Thomas Kelly is somebody that I recommend that you read and have available, because I know he struggled a great deal in his life, but he talks about it and shares his challenges and his way of dealing with them. So it's a really good testament of a Quaker. He lived just really up until the beginning of World War II. So I don't know what the dates are. So I could put this, I'll put this in the chat where I found it online.
I remembered a Quaker that shared that scenario. It was George Watson.
That's what I was going to say, that, but I just
yeah.
He's
and Elizabeth Watson.
Yeah.
They had both died quite a while ago.
Yeah, they were friends all over the the country. I mean, you know, so we lived in a lot of different places, and George was a professor, and Elizabeth was a Quaker theologian, which is a contradiction in terms. But she wrote quite a bit about women and the Bible. So both those people.
Speaking of the Bible, I guess one thing that struck me in the video, and something I questioned, and I wonder what you guys think about this as well. It was clear that sort of for her, sort of one of the mark that one was worshiping in a sort of good and authentic and truthful way was that sort of serenity and sort of an inward peacefulness. I wonder, and I worry sometimes, I mean, people in the Bible are quite agitated a lot of the time. I mean, Jesus throws out the moneylenders. He's angry about things. There's the Garden of Gethsemane. There's the Passion of the Christ. And certainly, if you go back into the Old Testament, God is hardly a calm, serene figure during that. I wonder why it is that the serene is how God is in our worship, rather than also being present in states of anger and agitation when it's right.
I like that thought a lot, that query. I'm sorry, was someone else going to speak? I've been speaking a lot.
I don't think we hear the still small voice when we're angry. But if we're so upset and so focused on one thing, sometimes there's a breakthrough answer. And so I haven't seen that in meeting for worship, actually. I don't think.
Wow, it's great that it's great that you brought the still small voice, because I think that's something people hear. But the whole story. Well, I'm going to tell a little broader context than the really broad context of that passage. So Elijah has had to flee to the desert, and because he's being sought by the king to be killed, and and so Elijah is in this cave, and so suddenly a whirlwind comes through, and then an earthquake, and it says, but God was not in the whirlwind. And then an earthquake comes through, but God was not in the earthquake. And then a fire comes through. God was not in the fire. And then it doesn't say God was there, but then it just says, and then Elijah heard a still small voice speaking. Okay. Now, I'm going to back out to the greater context. The reason Elijah was on the run for the king was because he had committed mass murder. He had put 500 of the prophets of Baal, the rival to Yahweh, to the sword. And so the king was pissed at him, and he had to get out of town. There's a lot of layers to that. And yeah, maybe Elijah was a little bit agitated there, and some people were agitated at him too. But it's but that idea that where is that voice? Where are we to listen for that? Maybe it's not always in the still small voice. I don't know.
Maybe it's when you're so agitated and you finally get up. That's when you can hear the still small voice.
Well,
So if you're agitated, and then just give up and just blank out. Sometimes I hear the still small voice.
well, what I find interesting in that story is that it comes back to that of God and everyone, and that even a mass murderer might be somehow a prophet of God. At the same time, can you hear the still small voice? It goes back to James's statement, that we're very complex human beings, with very complex emotions. And so, interesting.
Well, my observation of that story is that back in those days, the king lived in tents. The state as a Leviathan was just in its natal form. It was just beginning to arise. And so because the state was not yet the Leviathan, taking the law into your own hands was not beyond the pale. Taking the law into your own hands and performing the functions of the Leviathan was not beyond the pale. However, with regard to the question about why don't we experience anger during meeting, anger, of course, is there to alert us that action is necessary. But anger is predicated by fear. And if we were to take action out of fear, we would not be taking action out of love. And I think the goal of Quakers is that their actions be out of love. And that's the purpose of meeting, actually, is to get us back into a state of love where we can act on this thing that we were afraid of, but act on it out of love. And there's a word for that, and that's called a phrase for it. It's called detaching with love. And that's what we as Quakers strive to do, so that our actions can come from love.
Yeah, I guess in the end, I don't think it's God's job to make us feel comfortable in meeting. The role of the Spirit is often to make us uncomfortable. And maybe there's a different kind of anger. You might say righteous anger, or the anger of love or something. But, you know, if I'm sitting in a meeting thinking about what kids are going through in Syria, I'm not serene. And I believe that the Spirit wants me to think about those kids and hopes that I will be roused to some kind of action. So feelings of anger, of sorrow, all these things are natural in the Spirit. If you're spending the whole time being serene and la-di-da, maybe you ought to go get yoga lessons or something. But
that leads me to talk about, for me, there's a real difference in meeting, the corporate experience of meeting for worship, and my ability to actually struggle with things, struggle with challenges, and come out with sometimes just a sense that God has told me what to do, or, you know, that I've figured that out. I don't see God as, and sometimes not. Sometimes I need to continue to struggle, but that corporate context works much better for me than meditating on my own, especially when others are, I mean, Nadine didn't talk at all about the gathered meeting or the covered meeting, which Friends have historically talked about as a meeting that gets deep enough that that there really is a sense that the presence is there, and that it's there among us. And sometimes even on Zoom, I felt that is the case with this meeting. I think it happens, physically it happens a little better in the meeting house, and I look forward to us getting back into the meeting house, most of us getting back into the meeting house for that reason. But you know, I can also say that sometimes the Spirit gets disrupted in me in the meeting house, and I can't help cause that because the benches are pretty uncomfortable, and or there will be some outside thing that I don't experience on Zoom that will really disrupt my ability. But that's another struggle. So I just, I mean, to me there is a difference, and I wonder about other people. It makes a difference to me. I can find the Spirit more easily in the corporate context than I can when I'm sitting and meditating, even in the most beautiful natural spot. The other human beings matter to me.
Yeah, Liz, that kind of rings a little bit with me, along with something that Glenna said earlier. I've heard it said from a friend that, not from meeting, a friend in the world, that it's easy to trust God when God is all you have. And I think to me, in meeting, I want to, it becomes easier for me to trust God when there are others around, and that sense of, if all I have is God, then it becomes easy to trust God is almost the, you know, the pinnacle or the nadir of depression, of despair, and we don't need to get there somehow. You know, in meetings, sensing, looking forward. James had talked too about we had talked about the biblical reference, and it strikes me that sitting in silence and listening to the small voice is a way that we acknowledge that God is present, that God is present, and we can, in fact, if we can silence ourselves, we can actually hear that voice.
Since I'm new to meetings, I was curious, does the small voice come through every single meeting through someone?
Not in words necessarily.
Yeah, sometimes no one speaks at all for the whole hour. Other times you may have multiple people speaking throughout the hour, and sometimes there's, I mean, I've only been coming for a short time myself. I'm not a, but it just seems like what the times that I have come, and it does seem like that there have been times where there might even be, not that there was necessarily beforehand planned on that way, but there, like a theme almost or something, and you're not supposed to really seek that out or to speak to somebody else's, you know, you're supposed to try to shy away from, if somebody has spoken on something, speaking, you know, to what they have spoken to. But sometimes there does seem to be almost like today, it was Mother's Day, so there could have very easily been several people speaking about their mothers, but it just depends.
Well, like Liz, I find that my worship is enhanced by meeting corporately. And my theory is that it's because our brains are like radios, and when we're together, they resonate together and amplify the signal. Speaking to that, when we were meeting on Washington Square, I was once worshiping next to a fellow who, after a few minutes, it was like there was this black shroud that fell around him that was pushing me away. It was like a protective shield or something. And after the meeting was over, I asked him, "Hey, what were you doing during meeting?" He said, "Oh, I was practicing S. It's pretty powerful, huh?" And I thought, yeah, it's pretty powerful, but it did not enhance my experience of worship. And ever since then, I've stayed away from this S stuff, whatever it is. It changed its name though to Landmark, and I chanced to go to a Landmark forum one time and left after the first session because it's some kind of practice of fear and intimidation. So yes, when we meet corporately, we can enhance the worship experience. But I think that's only if we do it the right way.
Not to change the subject too much, but I was wondering, I do tend to some days, I carry a journal and I journal a lot, whether it's in meeting or, just in general. But sometimes during meeting, it helps me to clarify. I don't know. I just feel the need to write things down sometimes. And so that does help me. Not always, but it just, there are times where, and then I was thinking of, I've been reading, there's he's an Indian fellow by the name, I never can pronounce his name right, Eknath Ezran or something like that. And anyway, he writes about Hindu culture, but also, he uses the Sermon on the Mount, and he's the prayer of St. Francis. And he has this kind of like, it's like the Eightfold Path or whatever, his own little eight process or of 8 things that he does. And one of them is when he meditates, he always has and I've been playing around with this idea as well, with either a mantra or a word of scripture or something like that. Again, the prayer of St. Francis is in one that he was, and the Catholics use something called Lectio Divina, I think it's called, where they take a passage of scripture and then they meditate on that passage of scripture. And he talks about how that, can be a really important and way of channeling and focusing our intent, I guess, when we go into worship. So I wondered if anybody would like to speak on that, and whether there's anything in Quaker tradition that speaks on those types of,
Traditionally, Quakers have felt that bringing written material into meeting and reading during meeting and probably journaling during meeting was not appropriate. As preparation for meeting, that's very appropriate. And many friends have practiced journaling and reading the Bible and other things before meeting and during the week, sometimes in groups and things. I think these days, I feel like our meeting, there's lots of people journaling, and there are people reading the Bible and other things. And it seems to help them to center and settle down. And I think maybe that some of those rules are don't work as well for us. So I'm glad we don't have those rules in this meeting. There are still many meetings on the East Coast where you would really be, somebody would speak to you if you brought reading material in, especially if it wasn't the Bible. Terry, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, there's several of these meditative practices or practices from other traditions that can be useful as a way of centering down to meeting for worship. The danger is that you shouldn't confuse them. I remember a friend who was very influential on me in those days, Svea Sauer, at the time from Austin, France, said people just don't get it, that it's not a meeting for meditation, it's a meeting for worship. And I think what she was getting at is many of these practices are about controlling your mind and your consciousness, and they're technical in that sense. They're not worship, they're more of a way of getting to worship. So I think there's a certain modicum if you wish to repeat a mantra to yourself or read a simple passage of the Bible as a way of focusing and centering. I think that's fine. And I also think that engaging those practices as part of your own personal spiritual disciplines is good too. The thing to watch is to not mistake meditation for worship.
Howard?
Two thoughts on that. One is, I actually used to bring the Bible in to worship and read it. And I stopped doing that when I realized, and this is personally for me, everyone has their own relationship with the written word and with scripture and things. But for me, I found that the Bible was taking me away from the sense of corporate worship that we were all together, because I was just getting in my own little world with that text. And so I stopped doing it. And I think that idea that, you know, what we're doing there is we are doing something together, you know, and we are, and, you know, that, and we've alluded already to the sense of the gathered meeting, you know, of that sense that we're all there together. And so it doesn't matter if there's a message every time, because what we're doing is beyond words, as far as I'm concerned. And what we're there for is beyond words. The words help a lot of the time. I wouldn't recommend this as a, you know, a practice to come late to meeting all the time. And I always have tried to be on time, you know, very punctual. But every once in a while, something would keep me from coming to meeting right on time, you know, and I'd get there 5 or 10 minutes late. And I'd walk in, I'm talking about when we were meeting physically, and it was really something amazing, because I'd walk into, and somehow the rest of the, you know, the body of the meeting had already done this work of coming together, and I just got to walk into it. And it was almost like, you know, when you come in, it's like you're going through a force field. You know, there's that, I don't know what it is that was around, you know, the meeting, and I was walking through and into it, and it was, you know, that really made me aware that we were doing something special, you know, together, in, you know, without even talking.
Well, the Bible can be tricky because it's all these different things. There's some parts that are powerful and poetic and deep that can help you get to worship. But most of it actually is very discursive, has a plot, you know, and so it can end up like reading a novel and meeting for worship. And it really can take you away from the spirit, because, you know, some of it is designed as historical discourse and not as inspirational. So, you know, I'm not sure if I recommend it, having done it a lot over the years.
Okay, I hope a Bible joke is in order here.
Sure.
So, there was
And only you can do it.
Well, we should have smelled it coming, but go ahead.
There's that practice that some people have of when they are trying to seek guidance, they just open the Bible to a random passage, you know. So there's the guy who was wondering what to do about something. So he opens up the Bible, and the first passage he finds is, "And Judas went and hanged himself." And he says, well, okay, I'm not sure if it's telling me to do that. So he opens the next passage, and it says, "Go thou and do likewise." And so that, okay, wait, I got it. One more time. So he opens it again, and it says, "If it were done, it were well that it were done quickly." Anyway, maybe a little dark Bible humor there, but that idea that the Bible is a lot of things, and it's got its place, but not always in meeting for worship.
Another Another question I have that I want to throw out there is that with worship in the Quaker tradition, and something that I quite miss a lot, having frequented the other traditional churches, and in the UU church, I was involved in choir and singing, and I've even heard jokes about Quakers. Oh yeah, you know, those people that can't sing. Um, and it's I do quite miss that quite a bit, you know, the fact, and there's a young woman in the meeting that every so often will, speaking of bringing something, she'll sing a little line from a pop song or a song or whatever, and I find that quite refreshing, because I miss it. If there's one thing that really puts me in a state of, again, I won't use the word meditation, but almost a state of prayer. It's almost like a state of prayer is music, and it's interesting that the Quakers are lacking in that. It's almost seems like in that arena. So can somebody speak to that?
Yeah, I'm sure there are a number of us who could speak to it, but I probably, and I hope that somebody will correct me if I'm saying anything that isn't correct, but basically, George Fox actually did sing, I gather, not in meeting though, and music was seen as a distraction from the spirit, and in particular, hymnal singing was seen as a distraction, and the kind of humorous way to get to why that is why do Quakers sing slowly, sing hymns slowly? Because they're looking ahead to make sure they agree with the words, and basically there are words in our hymns, and those words are don't allow us to have continuing revelation all the time. And so Quakers, the early Quakers and the Quakers of the, the program meeting Quakers do sing. And we do have, it's the unprogrammed Quakers who came up with this worship and song hymnal too. And we do have a singing meeting, and I hope you can join us for that, Daniel, because I really like that. There's only a few of us who usually attend, but it is
On
really
Zoom,
nice. Yeah. It's on next Sunday. So anyway, it's an interesting question, but the feeling is it's the words, not the music so much.
Well,
Howard?
Terry, go ahead.
Yeah. All right.
Well, early friends did sing now and then in meeting. My sense of it, we don't know, we weren't there, is that, the important thing was you could sing as song comes into your heart in that spontaneous way. And I got to thinking about this, that means that in a way, this kind of singing and meeting is to hymn singing what spoken ministry is to sermoning, to sermons. It's a little different.
Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah, I recall reading in the letters of George Fox where someone's apparently asked him about this, and he says, kind of what Terry said. He said, if it is, in the spirit, a friend should definitely, give voice and song. And then he says, and this may be a little bit differing from what Liz just said. He says, I cannot sing. That is not in my estate. So
it was not his gift. It was not his gift.
His strong point. Yeah.
It was not his gift.
In that vein, back when we were on Washington Square, there was a friend, Dennis Dick, who would rise regularly to sing. And one of the weighty Quakers who had founded the meeting, John Barrow, and was instrumental in getting the meeting house there for us, would turn his hearing aid down whenever Dennis would rise to sing. And one day he made a mistake and turned it up. And all of a sudden there was this loud buzzing noise that everyone in the meeting room could hear. And John jumped up and he pulled the hearing aid out of his ear and threw it on the ground. So I think that may have been what George Fox was talking about.
Yeah, some of us have the gift of song and some of us don't. So anyway, I just, it's an interesting thing. Dancing is another one that Quakers were prohibited from doing during the quietest period of Quakerism. And it was a frivolity that didn't fit in with life. So there's a couple of people who we haven't heard from at all. And I wonder, Hannah and Luke, whether you have any thoughts that you'd like to contribute. Not, you can pass if you want, that's fine. I don't even know if Luke is actually there. Anyway, but
I'd like to say
Irene,
something too. Yeah, I came to the last Zoom meeting and I was pleasantly surprised that it was about Better Angels, because I go to the Better Angels in Austin. And then today I actually went to the meeting house and it was about a doctor and what they're doing down there. And I'm a nurse, so I'm surprised that I was moved at these times to come here.
well, you'll find a lot of us are attempting to be God's hands in various ways. So maybe welcome and can keep coming. Hopefully we'll all be in the meeting house, or a lot of us will be in the meeting house soon. It's interesting.
Sorry to interrupt, Liz. We often, if we go for the full 2 hours, we'll usually take a little break sometime, sort of towards the middle, and it's about 2:15.
I was thinking we would end at 2:30, but
right. Okay,
yeah,
in that
that's
case,
right.
we could.
You're I mean, I think 90 minutes on Zoom seems like a lot, unless people feel like there's still a lot to be said. Have I covered most of what I should? Other worship and ministry people, like Howard?
There is no should, as we know.
Oh,
It's been great.
Yeah.
I guess I have one sort of provocative question, and another
good.
provocative question. So I guess I love the story of the still small voice speaking to Elijah, God not speaking from the whirlwind or from the earthquake, in terms of how we think about what ministry is like, or what revelation is like, that's sort of our paradigm as Quakers, the still small voice. I wonder that, like, in the story of Job, like, God does speak from the whirlwind. That is how he speaks or like speaks from burning bush. Or in the New Testament, you have like the sort of the flames coming forth from people as the Holy Spirit arrives. I guess I wonder, are we missing, if we only think of the still small voice as the only way in which God speaks to us, are we missing other ways in which Spirit might be speaking in our lives that are a little bit less subtle?
James, I just want to say how much I appreciate the fact that one of your gifts is being a contrarian. And I really do appreciate, because a little bit of me is like that too. So I really find that refreshing that you always have a contrary, like, what about this? Well, what about this? And think about that. So I just want to say that.
Thank you, Daniel.
Howard, what was that episode of the Bible Geek where he was talking about the passage where the prophet was, his donkey started talking to him?
Oh yeah.
That was Balaam, I think.
Balaam, yeah, Balaam and his ass, and that's
Yeah.
actually in, is that in the Apocrypha? I think it is. But yeah, where the donkey starts talking to the prophet, and I can't remember what the Bible Geek had to say. Bible Geek's a guy that some of us listen to. He's a very, very accomplished Bible scholar who calls himself a Christian atheist, but is very, very respectful and kind to any point of view. You know, as long as people just have questions about the Bible, he'll take a swing at them. What did he say about that?
Oh, he just thought it was fairly improbable that this is a remarkable thing and it was not isolated. There were other parts where creatures are given voice. I suspect that modern people are now unable to hear the voice of donkeys, and if they do, they have got other problems.
But I mean, James, to more seriously answer your question, maybe, but to me, I mean, there's a lot of, I think you're right that Nadine's emphasis on serenity and bringing serenity in, that isn't what it isn't I'm not necessarily serene when I come to meeting. I would like to be very often. I would probably be more prepared to be part of making that gathered meeting. But I often bring with me the laundry list of problems and the, or the one thing that I'm struggling with. And it's in that that I can bring it there. I can safely bring it there. And sometimes I find an answer, whether it's just something that comes to me or whether somebody has a message that really speaks to me. But it isn't all fun and joy. I mean, it isn't all, I guess if that's what we mean by serenity, that.
I think rather than serenity, it's more about surrender.
Surrender, right.
And it's interesting, those words may be related, that you give yourself over to the Spirit. You give yourself up and let the Spirit take charge of your inner life. And there's a kind of serenity that's necessary in order to do that. You have to let go of the fears. You have to let go of the tensions and everything. And then you can truly listen to the Spirit. Now, what the Spirit has to say to you may get you wound up again. But that's the way it is.
I think, James, your question is a good one. I think, and I do wonder, there are days that I wonder if what I'm seeing isn't a burning bush or isn't already a talking donkey, or not to sound silly about it, but maybe that's going on. But the harder thing to me is, because I think that seeing a burning bush, let's just use that as an example, it is, maybe we wouldn't recognize it, maybe we would, but maybe I would recognize it, or maybe I wouldn't. But the thing that I think I spend more time on is when I do hear that small voice trying to determine, is that coming from a place of compassion and love? Is that really the small voice, or is that my ego still speaking? That there's more energy, I think, for me spent doing that than hunting for burning bushes, I'll say.
Sometimes it seems to me we have burning bushes all around us.
That's what I was about to comment. I heard this story today, and speaking of bringing something prepared, but I was thinking about it during worship, actually. So it's interesting that this speaker was speaking, and he tells this little story about this guy who adopts this dog, and the dog, he playing catch with the dog with the ball, and throws the ball. And they're at the park, and he's throwing the ball, and the dog goes, get the ball. keeps doing that. And then they're near a lake, and so he throws it out into the water, thinking that the dog's going to run out into the water and get the ball, swim out there and come back. Well, the dog runs out to the water's edge, and instead of swimming out, he walks on the water. The dog walks across the top of the water, gets the ball, brings it back, and he says, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is my eyes deceiving me? Does this 3 or 4 more times to make sure that he's seeing what he's seeing, and sure enough, the dog runs across the top of the water and then he gets his neighbor and brings his neighbor, and he says to the neighbor, watch this. You got to see this. So he throws the ball out on the water, and then the dog runs out across the water like he did before and gets the ball and comes back. The neighbor doesn't flinch. He just sits there and dumb as a log. And so he does it several more times, and he's watching the neighbor doesn't. And so he says, don't you find something extraordinary about this dog? And he says, yeah, the dog can't swim. And so the point, though, or the story that he was trying to make was that extraordinary things happen all around us all the time, and yet we blind ourselves to those sometimes. And so I was just thinking about how these little finches that I have, it's just these extraordinary little, the life in that. And then the burning, and then there was a fly on the window today, and I was thinking about just how extraordinary a fly is. So a common house fly, that there's so much, and that goes back to the prayer without ceasing thing. So in a way, maybe the animals do speak to us, the insects, the animals, the things, when we become quiet within ourselves and really tune into life and present with what's going on around us, and then we are worshiping, whether we're doing it in a corporate setting in the meeting house or whether we're doing it, in our lives as we go about our business. So
Prayer without ceasing.
Well, my thought is that the language of the Spirit is not English. That we perceive the Spirit and acts upon us, and we somehow translate that into human expression, into human language. And because we're modern people in this kind of culture, we're most comfortable in translating that into literally spoken language. If we were in a different culture, in a different place, it might be expressed better as visions or more subtle experiences. I don't know, but there's some kind of, the Spirit comes to us and we do something with it. And whether it comes out as visions or comes out as language is just a product of who we are.
Well, with regard to that prophet who heard his donkey speaking, if he were alive today, he would be considered to have a disability and he would be treated for schizophrenia and given medication so that he no longer heard the donkey speaking, or else he would become a homeless person and not influential in any way. And one wonders, if it's such a great disability, why is it so common? Why is it that 1 out of 50 of us are schizophrenic? It seems like that should have been weeded out by evolution over the course of thousands of years. And I think the reason is that in a primitive hunting group, they needed somebody who could change paradigms on them whenever they got into a bad place, which was probably pretty frequent. And 1 out of 50 is just about the right number to have one in each hunting group, hunter-gatherer group. Whereas today, apparently, we eschew paradigm shifts because we already have enough paradigm shifts to handle more than we can handle. I mean, they're coming at us constantly. So what's the point of that with regard to Quakerism? Well, it could be that schizophrenics are still valuable for their insights. And that is perhaps the Quaker perspective.
I'm gonna have to bow out. I gotta go see Mom.
Yeah. Give her our love.
All right. Thanks, Liz. It was great.
Good. I hope that people have had some of their questions answered, and I know that I learned from others. And we'll, yeah, go ahead.
One more thought. I'm sorry if I'm
No,
pressing
that's
you
okay.
here, but I remember reading something by an African American physician who said whenever he talked to any of his patients from his community, he always said, well, when you get to the hospital, don't talk about the fact that Jesus told you this and Mary told you that, because they'll think you're crazy. We all know that we have these experiences and that it's perfectly normal. And that for us culturally, it's normal in a way that it's not normal for those white folk. And so, as I was saying, having a vision is as legitimate a way to perceive the spirit as having a kind of oratory inspiration. But, sometimes when people hear voices, they really are crazy. And the thing that is an antidote to that is the support and attention of the community. It's having the community measure the weight of a leading, for example, that you are dependent. It's not just the spirit in you, it's the spirit in you and your community that leads you to truth.
That's a really important point, Terry, and why the corporate nature of what we do is really, really important. And also why sometimes in worship, a message will, at least in my experience, will come and I realize that I didn't hear it. So, and that may be me having a problem, or the message being not valid for me, is I guess what I would say. Not valid for me at that time. I think the impetus, though, to see the positive power of our worshiping together is really important, and that it also makes us feel less alone, and to be, we also haven't discussed, there are some things we do as friends that aren't comfortable for other people, and some people do go to, worship. Music is extremely important for them in worship. Some people have a very hard time settling for the amount of time that we settle. And, the staying still for an hour is a challenge for a lot of people. It takes practice. And believe me, friends, we've really gotten rotten at staying still, being on Zoom. So I think for me, it's going to be hard to sit for that period of time again, without, without stuff. And so anyway, I just think, I think we would, but the whole thing of, when we do have when we do have a message, when we do have a thought, it is filtered through. What our words are filtered through that gathered presence, and and also I mean, the fact is that our messages should start from a point of view of love. But that doesn't mean that they're not hard to hear.
Thank you so much for this, Liz. I guess
Yeah.
speaking of the Zoom and stuff, I just want to encourage everyone at Quakerism 101, if you're interested, there'll be a really interesting, I think, and hopefully profound sort of threshing session next Sunday at 4 o'clock, where we consider what worship will look like in our meeting when we do start to sort of return more fully into the meeting house. So I think these themes that we were talking about today of worship and ministry will be very, very applicable, and we'll be figuring these out in real time, what this will look like in this sort of new world.
And for those of you who've never been to a threshing session before, the reason, the difference in a threshing session from worship sharing or anything like that is, you know, envision the circle, and you go around the circle and you ask everybody to contribute their thoughts. And it is not a decision-making time. It is a time for listening to each other. And then the decision will get made in a business meeting after that. So, you know, but the idea is to be able to listen to everyone. And of course, there's the option to pass if that, you know, but actually the object of it is for everybody to listen to everybody else, not necessarily. It was good if everybody contributes, but it's not absolutely if you don't think you have anything to contribute, you should still come and listen, because when we go to discern our way forward, you will have heard where other people are coming from. So I think that, yeah, I think that's a piece that we maybe should have included in what a threshing session is and how it's different. So I've been to some that have been just incredible in what they've revealed. And changed my mind completely from, you know, what I thought when I came in.
How long is it? It's week at 4 p.m.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I can't imagine we'll be on for more than an hour and a half, but it might be shorter than that. It's really hard for me to envision how it's going to be on Zoom, where people bounce around in the position that they're in, you know. But somebody will have to keep track of who's speaking and who should speak next. Need good clerking, I guess. I think Steve will do fine. So.
Is this like a business meeting, or is this meeting for worship, or what is it?
We have a particularly difficult question before us, and that is, how do we go back and continue our Sunday worship? In what, now that, you know, some people can come to the physical meeting, some people can't.
Raul wants me to give him a hand bringing the box over.
Oh, good. Get Davis. Wait.
No, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Don't
you
worry.
Sure?
Yeah. If I'm not fine, I'll stop and say I'm not fine.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Anyway, we should have a moment of worship, and then end this. Okay. Is that okay, James?
Yeah, absolutely. Our next session of Quakerism 101 will be 2 weeks from now. So that will be May 23rd, also at 1 o'clock. And the topic that time is peace and social, or living in the light Quaker witness, which will be sort of peace and social concerns type topics.
And Irene, a threshing session is to help us prepare for a decision that we need to make, so it's done worshipfully, but it's not worship, and it's not yet a meeting for business either. It's just finding out where everyone's at.
It gives us a chance to know what everyone is feeling. It gets all the issues out on the table. And that's important.
And it gets all those issues out without gossip and conversation. between people where people are might want to take sides. It's when you're dealing with a difficult issue, there's the problem of taking sides. And that's not how we're supposed to go into our business meeting. We're not supposed to go into the business meeting having made up our mind as to the only way that it will work, because there are many ways that it might work, and together we can discern the best one. So, does that help, Irene? Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, the something heavy needs to be brought over, and that was what Terry. I don't want him to go do it alone, so I'm gonna end this meeting, I guess. But let's have a moment of worship. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Liz.
See you soon.